Hello and welcome to today's lesson. In today's lesson, we will be talking about polypainting in Zbrush and, almost everything that you might want to know about the system and how to use it. And make sure to keep watching to the end, because at the end I'll be sharing some nice tool that will be helpful for anyone who's using this, feature. We paint technically a vertex, so that's why it's called polypainting, because it is related to the polygon and the component, which is vertices in this case, or points. So when we want to paint, we need to be careful that the resolution of your paint is very dependent on your topology and the amount of vertices and points you have. So technically, with something like this, the painting will be low quality. And to start painting, let's go right away and talk about it. We need to activate RGB here and deactivate add, unless you want to sculpt and paint at the same time. But usually I would have one of them at a time active. And then we go to the color. Once you pick a color, say this red color, you see that all of your character turned to red. But don't worry, this is not a baked color. This is just a preview color. The reason why is because when we change the color, if the painting mode was turned off, you will first see a preview color on the entirety of your object. How do we activate painting? Either by start painting, and that's, we started painting. Unfortunately, you still see most of it being red, but that's just like a bug. Just move your canvas and, it will go away, and now only this area would be in red. The other way to activate that, I would go to subtool, and for the subtool that I'm painting, I would activate the brush symbol, and right away the color just disappeared, because technically we haven't yet painted anything in red. And when I start painting over my object, it would start painting in red. Now notice that my painting is slightly low res, and as I said, that's because I have low amount of divisions and low amount of vertices or points. The other way, if I say undo and turn it off here, the other way to activate, which is technically is the same button, but you find it in another place, and that would be if you scroll down until we reach to Polypaint down here, you'd have this button, Colorize. If you click on Colorize, it technically, the moment I click it, if I go here, it activated this, and vice versa. If I deactivate it, you go down to Polypaint, it will be deactivated. So it's just like another place to do the same thing. So now when I paint, there it is, I'm painting with the color here. Down here we have two colors. So we have the front color and the back color. So what's the difference? The front color is the one that when you just click and drag, you will paint with. The alternative, or the back color, is when you hold Alt, you start painting with that color. So, and it's nice to have them because you can, quickly switch. So technically, the default color on every object would be white. So if I made my back color into white, now while I'm painting in red, and if I hold Alt, I would be kind of erasing what I'm painting. So it's a way to have kind of an eraser. We have a switch color down here, so it kind of flip them, and you can use instead V. V is switching. The shortcut V would switch it. Now, if you want to change the color, we can just go here and change that color. Of course, we can go to the color menu where we have more space and we have more options in general to work with color. But say that I want to here and go and pick another color, and I start painting. Now you can change things about your painting by just going up here, and you would think that the intensity would be the thing that you'd want to play with. No, you have a slider specifically for RGB. So you'd want to change your RGB intensity, and that will change how intense you apply the color, which is a wise thing usually when you paint something organic, not to go 100% and to go to a really low RGB intensity. Another thing that we need to know is sometimes you would want to fill the entirety of your object with one color. When you go to another 2D application, usually you have the paint bucket tool. The alternative to that would be in colored here. You would want to go to fill object. Now, because I have it at 16%, it wouldn't fill it completely with green. I could go to 100% and go to fill object, and now everything become green. To continue working with painting, if I go to, for example, yellow or any color, it doesn't matter. So now if I, as you see here, we can make this look more dynamic by changing color intensity. And now I'm not right away painting with full intensity. Instead, I'm kind of slowly I'm building the value, right? So the more I paint over my object, the more I'm applying this color. What we could do also we could go to the stroke menu. I'll go ahead and like grab this, put it here just to make it easy to access. We can also access the stroke from here. Most of what we want can be accessed right away from here. So technically, let's just stick with that. And if we need, we go to that menu. So in here, we have a like first freehand and dots, which is very similar, so it doesn't matter much which one you're using. Drag rectangle, that is just dragging the alpha. So in this case, if I switch it to drag rectangle, I'll be dragging like my brush. So let's just go 100% and see there, like because I don't have any alpha, so it will take the shape of the brush, which is a circle, and it will be dragging that. But if I were to pick something like, for example, like this square, it will be applying a square. Now there's a few problems here. It doesn't look like a square. First, let's just add, as I told you, like let's add divisions, Control D, so that we have higher resolution for what we're working with. And when I apply it, it looks kind of circle, but like you can see that it's not fully circle. It is kind of rectangle, but not like it doesn't show up. The reason for that, because we have a fall off. Fall off tend to blur and fade the edges. But if I took the fall off down to -100, now I can draw my alpha complete. Okay. And we can change it to any alpha, or we can even grab an alpha from somewhere else. Now, if we go after drag rectangle, we say dots and freehand are very similar. Then we have color spray and spray. These are, in my opinion, like one of the more powerful features, and that will allow you to have more interesting coloring within ZBrush. Usually I don't use color spray. Usually I stick with spray, and the reason for that, we'll talk about it. But let me just first go with spray just to explain what sprays does, and I will show you why I don't like to use color spray. And again, maybe in certain scenarios, color spray would make sense. But here, when I go to spray, let's just go with, like no alpha, or maybe just a simple alpha. And now when we have spray, it's simply when I paint, I'm just like applying this, like I'm spraying this alpha based on that. If I did not have an alpha, again, I will spray the shape of my brush, because we have 0, like -100 at the focal shift. If I go like for 0 now we get relatively very similar to this alpha. So the difference is not that much. Of course, if I were to use something else, which kind of starts getting more interesting. For example, if I use this here, like you'd see like those shapes and so on. And usually like the more powerful ones would be this alpha here, alpha 7 and alpha 8, especially with organic, and sometimes even alpha 22. And also this one, alpha 60. These are the brushes that usually would give you more organic feel to your painting. So now, as you can see, there we go. I'm kind of like painting dots. So it's not like just one color. It have a variety of colors to it. So it does make sense to use this. I know like the color doesn't make sense at the moment, but you can see like this give you a variety. Of course, we're going to go and control it later on. And here also, it does make sense. So let me just actually go and pick white and go to my color fill, so that we kind of work with white. And now if I go to more, let's say this color and there, but instead like you'd see like this more powerful if I were to put my intensity at maybe like 11, and now I'm building that value. Now usually at the beginning I would fill my object with a color close to the skin. Like if say I'm doing a character, so I would pick like a color down here, like I will look at it. If this is small, like you can click and this will give you a bigger zone, or you can come up here and pick because this is slightly bigger. Also in the color menu, if I were to put it there, if we go to modifiers, this allow you to kind of like change, like you have way more stuff to work with, and also you can work with it here. So say like my skin, I want to go with something close to pink, like pale reddish, maybe something like that. I know like this is not perfect, but like a starting point we start with. You would want to spend more time at doing that. And remember, we put this to 100% fill. And yeah, by the way, like this is a good way to tell, because sometimes like the color here is kind of deceiving. So you'd say like maybe this is darker than I want. So you could change until you're happy with the starting point. Now, to be honest, keeping it at the matcap gray wouldn't be like a good indicative, especially with the skin. So I would say either go to flat and judge on the flat, or you could go to skin, to the skin material. That would be under standard materials. You have a skin. you would see like this is much brighter. And from there, of course, like you would want to start using darker colors and brighter colors to create a variety. And of course, like pick the correct color. You could even like look up online, like a color palette for skin. You can find some of those online. And I would come here, I wouldn't be like usually I don't work with 100. Maybe like at the very first stage I might use something like that, but usually I prefer to start with a lower value, and then I start applying this. Usually like I will apply this to everything because I want to have variety everywhere, but then I start applying like color zones, like forehead have more yellow, like a beard, the jaw and the beard area I'll start using like more bluish, like grayish tones. For example, one of the exception would be, for example, like the lips. I'd be using like maybe less variety, maybe not this alpha, something else. And also at this stage, like usually I would stick with this here, and probably like my mesh is still like low resolution. That's why I said like you need to increase your resolution. But just for the sake of explaining this, I would stay with this resolution. So you'd start doing something like that, and you start changing. For example, like, okay, I want to go with a brighter tone, maybe for the forehead. And of course, make sure like this one, like having lower intensity, because you don't want to like right away apply that color, but you want to, build it until you get something that you're happy with. And of course, you would do this over multiple passes. Eventually, you get to where you want. And of course, look at images, because it does have, for example, like the tip of the nose usually would be more reddish, so it doesn't hurt to use something that have more red. And sometimes you find like what you painted is a little bit leaning toward like saturated reddish color tone, and in that case you can go back to a more washed out color, like maybe like for example this white, and you start painting. And the cool thing, because we have these dots on a micro level, it will give you this nice break off. Give you this nice breaking in the color, and it's not going to be like one color. Let's go back, because we kind of like mainly not talking about like how to texture, but we're talking about the poly painting in general. I want to talk about something. So if I were to raise my intensity up to 100, and now when I'm painting, you would see like this. Actually, it would be a good example to use white. When I'm painting white, see like we don't have like full white. There is like variety in what I'm painting, so it goes between like white and some sort of grayish, and even like darker than like a darker gray. And same thing like if I were to pick like say red here, so you see like okay, there are like more orangish, like darker red, brighter red. If I go to my stroke, down here you have options. So you have placement, you have scale, you have color, and you have flow. What's causing this is the color. So if I take it all the way to 100, you have like really from like dark, like the darkest to the brightest. So that kind of do that. And if I were to go to color and put it to 0, it will be only one color. Whatever color I have picked, it will be that. So I'm not going to have variety at all. So that's when you kind of decide like, okay, maybe I don't want like just one color. It's nice to have variety in the color. So maybe 30%. The second thing would be going to placement. So if I go to 1, this means like very spaced out, slow down the build off of the color. And if we go to 0, it will be very dense. It's almost like a constant brush. So usually when I do like something like skin, I would lean toward either keep it at the default or even go higher, maybe 1 or less. But notice also like when I do that, see how like it's way bigger than my brush, my area. Whereas, so you need to take that into consideration. But when I go to like placement, but it do 0, see like I'm just kind of confined with my brush size. Also, you can play with the brush scale. So up here, like you have scale set to 1, but you can put it to 0, and that would give you like very variable scaling. You can see it here, but like if I were to pick, for example, like this rectangle, and you see like not all my rectangle are the same size. I can go to a bigger brush, and you'd see like some of my rectangles are big, some of them small, and so on. But if I were to go to scale 1, now they all have the same size roughly. So again, there's another way to change this. In the case of a brush like this, it wouldn't be very noticeable. And also we have the flow. So flow is another one also that could contribute to the build off, like slow down the build off. So if I go down here and we go to flow, put it to 1, and if I were to go to flow and put it back to 0, you would see like the flow made it less. By the way, these are not like values, but these more of like multiplier. So usually, like for example, like 0 would be like the full range from 0 transparent to fully opaque. And when I go to 1, for example, in this case, it will be all of them just like have one value, which is whatever value I have up here. So, you know, you can play with those and change them. So these are more variables and like allowing for randomness in your brush. This one, like again, like I don't play with it. It doesn't contribute to, specifically in this case, to this brush. So mainly I would do that, okay? Now, one thing also you need to be careful with is that usually painting doesn't work well with layers. So be careful. You can paint while you have layers, but it doesn't work well. It tend to, especially once you start adding more layers, like maybe on one layer that's fine, but if you think by adding more layers, we have 2 layers and I can turn it on and off. Technically it works, but it tend to create bugs later on. Like if you were to paint like a full character or a full object and use layers, you would understand what I'm talking about. So usually I stay away from using layers because I guess layers is not very, you know, helpful when it comes to this. Especially once you start changing colors. See there, like start giving me weird artifacts. And I don't know exactly why that happens. See there, like we have these weird art, as if there's like something under in the painting. Another thing we need to talk about is ZBrush allow you to paint materials. Now, painting colors can be sent to another software. Like, so when you paint color, you can take this from here, from ZBrush, convert this to texture and take it back to Maya, Blender, or any 3D software. But material, on the other hand, it doesn't, but it's just for preview inside of ZBrush. So what we could do, we could technically turn off RGB and turn M for material. And if I were to switch to another material, like this chrome material, and I paint, so now I'm painting a chrome here, right? If I switch now from this chrome to like say this startup, you would see that this will have this chrome all the way. Now we have layers, so let me just bake. Actually, let me just turn off and bake. And now without the layers, if we were to go back and use the chrome, I'm painting the material. So I'm painting, it doesn't show up that I'm painting. The reason for that, because like I have it applied to the entirety of it, but the moment I switch to something else, you would see, okay, I applied that material here, but on other areas, it would take whatever this material is. Eventually, if I were to fill my entirety of my object, like everything in my object with a specific material, so let's just pick the gold here, and let me just go color and fill object. So now I filled everything with this material. If I switch to like this material here, it doesn't respond because I already painted everything with gold and no more that I can change this material. I can change it, but it's not going to show up until I start painting over it to replace it, or go to color and fill. So that's another way to do it. As you've seen, when I'm painting gold, for example, you would see that I have like very jagged edges, harsh edges. And the reason for that, because again, you cannot blend 2 materials together. So you cannot have like 50% gold and 50% whatever the other material is. So either gold or the other one. So it doesn't look at like your fall off and stuff like that. And this is kind of like one of the weaknesses for painting with material. But I guess when you're doing like just trying to do a preview, it wouldn't be bad from a distance. And you know, as long as you're aware that this is a thing. And also, as we said, like this is only a ZBrush thing, so you cannot take it outside ZBrush. So it's just like you see it here inside of ZBrush, but once you take it outside, the only thing that you can take with you would be color, not material. And while you're painting in general, you need to be careful which material you have, because whatever color you have will be multiplied with the original color of the material. So it might be deceiving. So what you see might not be the actual color. The best way to tell which color you kind of have actually is to go to flat color, which here, like the original place would be down here. Now, if we painted material, unfortunately, there is no way to erase a material. So now if I were to switch this one, the only way for me to apply this one is to start painting this material. But if you want to go back to where you know, instead of like painting, like I just want to click at a material and this material changes instantly the moment I click on it there, right? What you need to do is go to flat color, right? The material that is called flat color. You can think of it like an eraser, where I paint, right? Or I just go to color fill. Now technically I removed any material information, and instantly when I go back to these materials, they would start switching based on what I'm selecting. So if I go with this chrome, it would switch to chrome and so on. So I need to remember that one. And for the color, this is for material, but if I want to kind of like go like to the default color, which is the default color for any object like this one when I add it is white. Technically what you see here is white. It looks gray. That's because, like as we said, like any color we have will be added to my material, and because my material is gray, it looks gray. If I go to the flat, you can see that this is white. And if I go, for example, to the skin, which is more leaning toward white, you would still like see, you know, closer to a white color. So let's talk about why I don't like color spray. Remember when we were using spray, when we have 100% value, and let's just go back to RGB, not M. At this stage, like if I were to pick like any color and I paint, it does give me like a range. We remember that we talked about the color slider. This will give me, you know, like different shades of this color. So between like a bright red and dark red and, you know, in between, that's what I get. But guess what? Once I switch it to color spray, we still have similar, like all these sliders are still the same, but the color here isn't working the same way as it was when we were looking at spray. Now it's working with actually variety in the colors. So when I push it to 1, it will give me like rainbow color, because I'm telling it like pick any color you want. And if I were to drag it down to like, let's say 0.3, I would be closer to my color. But again, like the tolerance for changing that would be less. And as you can tell, if I were to take it to 0, now I don't have any variety. So that's why I don't like it. It doesn't add anything, because usually I rarely want to change the color. I only want to work with the shades of the color, like dark, bright, you know, saturated, desaturated. But I'm not interested while I'm painting like red to start getting blue or even green dots, which doesn't make sense for most of your skin. And you can still also use anything, like most of what you use with ZBrush. Like you could use, for example, masking. So if I were to mask, for example, and be careful, like masking also do get affected by the RGB intensity. So you need this to be at 100 if you're masking. But now if I switch to coloring and I want to go back, now anything that is masked wouldn't be painted. Say like we switch to the color spray, like this alpha, and then we go to a darker color, and now I'm painting, right? So I'm doing, but like the area that is masked, it's not gonna get affected. Okay, so now I will talk about the things that I promised at the beginning of the video. For example, I have this character in front of me, but say that maybe like I don't like certain things about the colors. I don't want to repaint my model, and we could do this in Photoshop, but is there like a way to fix such thing here in ZBrush? And what I'm talking about is changing the color range. Maybe I don't like how red this is. Maybe I want her to look more pale, or maybe I want her to look more saturated, or maybe slightly shift the color tones. So maybe this is too red to my liking, and I want it to be slightly more orangey or more, you know, yellowish and so on. So what you would be doing here, and this will be done on the paint, not on the texture, because remember, we could convert the painting to texture. So if I go to texture and I go to new from Polypaint, this will create the texture. So in that case, if this is like the texture, make sure to turn it off so that it doesn't show up. And then go to Polypaint, and in the Polypaint, if I scroll down, there's adjust color. And in this window, you can kind of like similarly navigate as you do in ZBrush. You can use the buttons up here to zoom in and out, but yet better, you can just use Alt and right click, and Alt right click, then release the Alt to zoom in and out, and right click only to rotate around your model, just like inside of ZBrush. And now the cool thing is down here we have these sliders here, especially the first set of slider here. And my model here does not have a lot of things, so maybe we go and just like for the sake of showing this, go ahead here and maybe select like, let's say like she have some sort of you know, tattoo or something on her face, and you know, so she have something here, like there is this blue, and like let's make some greenish there. And now I go to the adjust color. Well, guess what? Now we can do a lot of things by changing this. Generally, you would want to use the slider here, which it will give you slightly difference. So now she have more yellow skin tone. Maybe that's what you're trying to do. Of course, if I were to drag this too much, you'd start seeing the change on these colors. But because these colors are too bright, like a little bit of shift at the beginning might not feel that we've done much. But there it is, like we do this. Maybe the opposite, like I want to keep my color as it is, and because these are too bright, maybe I want to reduce my saturation. Now there are other things which is not as important with this plugin. Of course, like we have intensity, like make the model brighter, right? So you can make her darker, you can make her way too bright. Of course, like she's not gonna go white, complete white, but she's gonna get brighter skin tone, and so on. And there's like tint, which is kind of like tinting this. Now the tint, you might see, okay, this is weird, like this tinting to white, that's kind of like connected to this. So if I were to use like red, it will be tinted to red, you know? And if I put it to green, it will be tinted to green. So the tint is affected by whatever is there. Another thing, we have the RGB intensity. Now again, this is another slider. Now I don't know, like usually I like to play with the sliders with the HSV from hue, saturation, value. But like here also nice because we can only like selectively change things like red, for example. So red intensity, right? See, like any color that have red in it, it will be affected the most, right? So for example, like the blue, because it doesn't have any red in it, so it doesn't change, right? Same thing with the contrast, we can play with the contrast. So like any area that have like very strong red will be changed with the contrast. Of course, we can go the opposite direction to -1. Now finally here we can mask certain color and change it. I could just select, click on one of these swatches, click and drag, and select like the color. So for example, like I want to select this one, and you will see like right away it created a mask on everything except for this. And that's based on the tolerance here. So the more we increase the tolerance, it will include more colors. And the less the tolerance, like if I go all the way to 0, it's only gonna pick whatever was, like whatever the color that I selected. It's not gonna even like select the, you know, like the transition color. So usually you don't want to do that. And for example, like that. Now we can hide the mask if it's, because again it might hard to see what's gonna do. But if I hide the mask and we change this, as you can see, the only thing that changes that spot there, which is cool because this allows us to change certain colors. Now, of course, if the color, for example, like with the skin tone, like all the colors are very close to each other, so the tolerance won't be helpful. But this is good, like if you have something like a very different color from each other, like, and you can select more than one, by the way. So for example, like let's say I want to select also the green with it. So now we kind of see like right away, once I selected it, if I turn it off, you see like this is applying. And you can like turn off on everything. Like now, if I turn off all of them, it becomes like everything will get affected. Like this value will be applied to everything. But the moment when I turn then this on, there it is. And once you're happy with it, so let's say like we don't want this. Once I'm happy with it, I will go ahead and select OK. And there it is, like I changed my colors without the need to go to Photoshop or anything else. And I think this is like a nice way, because in many cases you start painting and you're happy with the, you know, like the details and everything, but you're not happy, like especially like when you over like a certain amount of time and when you zoom away from your model, you start noticing, okay, like this is not exactly the skin tone, or this is not like the color that I wanted to pick. And instead of, you know, changing everything, like starting from scratch, or maybe, you know, ruining your piece by, you know, trying to do some stupid stuff, all you need to do is come down here and just play with the adjust color. Finally, if your object have a UV and you want to convert this polypaint into a texture, that's only happen if you have a UV. What you need to do, you go to texture and create, and down here, if this object have a UV, all you need to do is new from Polypaint. Apparently my object here doesn't have a UV. You can check if your object have a UV by going down to UV maps, and if it doesn't say that you have a morph UV option or delete UV option, means that there is no UV here. So technically you can go ahead and create a UV, which we will discuss in the future, but quickly you can go to UV master and unwrap. So now my object have a UV, and as you can see, if I hit morph now, you can see that there is like this UV for my object. If I go to texture, the other thing we need to be careful with, the texture map that you will generate, it will be dependent on this slider here in your UV map. So at the moment it's set to 1K. which is 1024. So if you want it to be bigger, like a 4K map, you would want to select 4K, and you can go all the way up to 8K in ZBrush. But there's no button. You need to drag the slider to 8K. So say like I want it to be 2K, for example. Now all I need to do is go back down here and press new from Polypaint. The other thing you need to be careful with, it is dependent on which division you're on. So now I'm at the lowest division. So if I go to the highest division and I recreate this, you would see that I would get a high resolution texture. So if I go now new from Polypaint, you would get a much cleaner texture. Be careful with that, and this is how you create your texture. Now the only problem with ZBrush is this texture flipped upside down. So to fix that, first, we cannot export it. There's no export button down here. All you need to do is clone texture. Once you clone it, it will be loaded in your texture. So if you go to the texture menu up here, you'll find it. But because this is kind of upside down, you could use the flip button to flip it upside down and then hit export, and then just select a place on your drive and save your image. And you can use it in any software. You can take it to Photoshop to modify it. You can take it to Substance Painter to work more on it, and so on. Well, that's it for Polypainting. I hope that this video was interesting and helpful. Don't forget to leave a like, subscribe, and activate the bell, and see you in the next video.